You grew up in a world that expected you to be invisible. Not invisible in the way that feels like neglect. Invisible in the way that feels like competence. You learn to open your own doors, make your own dinner, sit quietly in the back seat while your parents worked through something they never explained. You learned that feelings were private, that problems were yours to solve, that no one was coming to rescue you, and honestly, you never really expected them to. And now you're in your 40s or 50s, maybe early 60s, and people call you the forgotten generation. They say you're cynical, independent to a fault, bad at asking for help. They say you don't talk about your emotions, that you use sarcasm like armor, that you show love through action, not words. And on the outside, that might look cold, distant, maybe even a little broken. But here's what most people don't see. Gen X didn't become this way by accident, and it wasn't a flaw. It was a survival strategy, so precise, so finely tuned to the world you were handed that it kept you safe when nothing else would. Let me show you what really happened. Before we go anywhere, I need to say this clearly. You are not emotionally stunted. You are not too hard to love, and you are not secretly unable to feel. The fact that you've built a life, kept people close, and stayed functional through decades of cultural whiplash is not evidence of brokenness. It is evidence of extraordinary adaptation. Your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do. It watched what the world gave you, and it built a shield that worked. Here's the first psychological reason Gen X became who they are. It shows up most clearly in how you handle crisis. When something goes wrong, you don't panic. You don't call 6 people to process. You assess, you fix, you move on. To younger generations, this looks like emotional avoidance. But watch what's actually happening inside you. There's no freeze. There's no collapse. There's just quiet, efficient movement toward a solution. Psychologically, this is called high distress tolerance with low emotional expression. It develops when you grow up in an environment where your feelings were not consistently mirrored or soothed. Maybe your parents were divorced. Maybe they both worked. Maybe they were dealing with their own unprocessed stress. You learned early that your internal states were yours to manage, and you got very, very good at managing them alone. Here's a relatable example. Think about latchkey kids coming home to an empty house at 9 years old, making your own snack, turning on the TV for company, not because anyone was cruel, but because the structure simply wasn't there. That child learned something powerful. No one is monitoring my emotional temperature, so I will monitor it myself. And I will not show it, because showing it doesn't bring anyone home. The reframe is this. Gen X's emotional independence was never a refusal to connect. It was an adaptation to a world that didn't have the bandwidth to hold them. You didn't learn to be alone because you were unwanted. You learned to be alone because that was the safest way to be. Now let's look at the second reason, and this one runs deeper. Gen X is famous for cynicism, for that flat, dry, almost amused skepticism about everything. Institutions, authority, promises, optimism. You don't trust easily, not because you're bitter, because you watch too many things fall apart in real time. The space shuttle exploding on live TV, the Challenger, the fall of the Berlin Wall, followed by economic uncertainty, AIDS when no one knew what it was, crack epidemics, divorce rates climbing, the promise that hard work guarantees stability turning out to be a lie. Psychologically, this is learned skepticism from institutional betrayal. You were told to trust schools, governments, media, corporations, and you watched every single one of them fail, lie, or disappear. So your brain did something smart. It stopped pre-attaching hope. It started assuming the flaw might drop out, not because you're pessimistic, because you were right again and again, to expect less. Think about the movies and music Gen X raised itself on. John Hughes' films about neglected teenagers, Nirvana singing about feeling stupid and contagious, Reality Bites, Slacker, the entire aesthetic of waiting for something that never shows up. That wasn't entertainment, that was documentation. The reframe here is quiet but important. Gen X cynicism is not emotional emptiness, it is earned discernment. You didn't stop believing in things, you just stopped believing in things that haven't earned it. That's not broken. That's boundaries. But here's the part nobody tells you. The third reason Gen X looks the way they do has nothing to do with the past. It has to do with the present. And it's the most compassionate thing you'll hear today. Gen X is currently sandwiched. You are raising children or helping with grandchildren while also caring for aging parents. You are working longer than any generation before you because retirement keeps moving further away. You are watching millennials and Gen Z get emotional language and therapy speak and workplace accommodations that you were never offered. And instead of resenting them, most of you just say nothing. You keep going. That silence is not stoicism. That silence is exhaustion so deep it has become familiar. Your brain has learned that expressing need doesn't reliably produce help, so it stopped asking. Not because you don't have needs, because asking costs too much and deliver too little. And this is where the identity shift becomes visible. Younger Gen X, in your 20s and 30s, you might have called this self-reliance. You were proud of it. You didn't need anyone. You could handle it. But now, in your 40s and 50s, something has changed. You notice the weight more. You feel the loneliness underneath the independence. You still don't ask for help. But you're aware now that you're not asking. And that awareness is new. So the behavior doesn't disappear. It softens. You start letting a few people in. Not dramatically, not with big emotional confessions. You show love by showing up, by fixing things, by being reliable in a world that feels increasingly unreliable. That's not avoidance anymore. That's a language of love that you invented because no one taught you the other one. Here is the emotional regulation reveal underneath all of this. Gen X's independence, cynicism, and emotional quiet regulate your nervous system in 3 specific ways. First, they create predictability. If you don't expect much, you don't get blindsided. Second, they reduce disappointment. If you don't ask, you can't be let down. Third, they preserve energy. Emotions are expensive. Processing takes time, and you have never been given enough time. So your brain built an autopilot, a familiar room, an old friend named "I'll handle it." That autopilot got you through divorce, layoffs, pandemics, and the slow erosion of every promise you were told to believe in. It is not a flaw, it is a masterpiece of psychological engineering given the materials you had. You are not the forgotten generation because you don't matter. You are the forgotten generation because you never learned to take up space. And that is not your fault. So here is where we land. Gen X did not become cynical, independent, and emotionally quiet because something is wrong with them. They became this way because the world asked them to grow up fast, figure it out alone, and keep moving. And they did, for decades, without applause, without accommodations, without anyone asking if they were okay. You don't need to change. You don't need to learn to cry more or ask for help or become softer. You just need to see yourself clearly. You are not broken. You are adapted, and the same quiet strength that made you invisible also made you unbreakable. That was never a weakness. That was the only way through, and it worked.